Okay, folks, it is go time. 1 o'clock here on the East Coast. Lori Stevens with Laws Communications. Welcome back once again. We have Captain Adam Myrick here, whom I'll introduce in just a moment. But first, want to give a quick shout out and once again thank Scope Now. Please check them out. So thank you for Scope Now for sponsoring the Smile Conference and participating in these master classes. At this point, I'd like to introduce Captain Adam Myrick, but also remind all of you folks to ask questions. Get in there and ask some questions. This is going to be another chock full of information sort of class, so be sure to ask lots of questions while we have Adam's attention. So Captain Adam Myrick has more than 16 years of media and public relations experience, preceded by nearly a decade in print, radio, and television newsrooms. He became the Public Information Officer, primary spokesperson, and media liaison for the 5-person Lexington County, South Carolina Sheriff's Department in 2015. As a member of the Sheriff Jay Kuhn's executive staff, Adam helps the department's public information unit. He is responsible for media relations, crisis communication, and issues management, along with the agency's video productions, social media, and digital content. Adam serves as an instructor with FBI LEDA. He is also a frequent speaker and panelist focused on law enforcement's relationship with the news media and the profession's use of social media and digital content. He holds a bachelor's degree in mass communication from Lander University. Welcome, Adam.
Thank you very much, Lori. It is certainly a pleasure to be with you. It's a pleasure to be a part of this, and I look forward to engaging with everyone as we talk about your agency and your news. And this is a presentation that is an opportunity for you to rethink a little bit about how your agency is doing things and how things are going in terms of your relationship with the media, yes, of course, but also your direct link to the community that you serve. At this time, I'll be happy to have any, I want to make sure I can advance my share at my screen here, Lori.
I think you can do it normally.
Yeah, let me try again here.
Okay, no worries. I can edit out all these little faux pas, so don't worry about it. Let's figure this out.
Okay, I'm sorry. I've shared my screen here, but I need to. Yeah, my slides aren't advanced. There we go. Okay, so at this time, I'll be happy to take any questions you might have. Well, you're probably a little bit confused, and you have a bewildered look on your face, and you're sitting there maybe a little bit uncomfortable with my asking for questions. And that same feeling is what we experienced now almost 3 years ago at the end of a media briefing during a very critical incident that involved a officer-involved shooting. And let me take you there. I'll go more in depth later, but I want to begin there because for roughly an hour and a half, I was able to, and my colleague was able to essentially live tweet the aftermath of this officer-involved shooting. And we really fed the media and most importantly, fed our community throughout this initial run-up to the media briefing. 6 o'clock rolls around, and again, after about an hour and a half of a lot of information sharing via social media, we put the sheriff on television right at the start of the 6 o'clock news. So we strategically picked that time. And then after he recapped the incident, after he did all of his scene setting and all of the details that he could share, he then asked the question that I asked you moments ago. Does anybody have any questions? At this time, I'll be happy to take them. And then it was then when all of that similar awkwardness crept in, that might have crept in with you and all of our participants here today, when all of the members of the media looked around at each other, and then they looked down at the ground in front of them as we were out on the scene at the shooting location. And none of them had a question. And so with that, the sheriff walked away and then got back to work. But because of that, it struck me at that moment that the reason that we had been so successful in that media briefing, and the reason we had been also very successful in the run-up to it, is because we had shared information. and that we had gotten that information to our community with a speed that we had not done before. So in our presentation today, I'm going to share with you a little bit about what we've learned since we've adopted this model that I'll go into in more detail later. I'm going to share with you some cases of what has worked, and there will be some miniature case studies, if you will. I will try not to make this a show and tell. We did this, next that, then this. But I do want to provide some recaps for you. And again, show you what has worked and tell you a little bit about how it worked and why we believe it was successful. I'll also want to share with you some practical considerations for you to use in your community and for you to use at your agency. And whether you're a one-person operation or whether you have a gigantic team at a major metropolitan agency, you will be able to implement some of these principles and precepts in what has worked here. Also, we'll talk about some very specific equipment needs as well. Again, you may have all of these tools at your disposal, or this may provide you with some ideas of things you might need to consider and put in your budget for next year. First and foremost, the entire thing is to think about yourself not only as a first reporter, or rather not just a first responder, but a first reporter. My FBI instructing colleague Judy Powell says that, and I always like that quote because at its essence, it is what we want to talk about today. We have a first response mindset, and rightfully so, but let's think about being a first reporter, breaking our own news, and covering our own agency like a beat. Let me do some scene setting for you in terms of where we are. The Lexington County Sheriff's Department, my home agency, is right in the middle of South Carolina. We are in the 75th largest television market in the country. There are about 365,000 television owning homes in the market. And we have what is referred to in the business as a heritage legacy number one television station. WIS here in the market is the market leader. It's one of the initial, very first television stations in the state. And because of that, they are really the market leader. Now, certainly during some other day parts, the stations are very competitive and the landscape has changed. But over the course of the past decades, WIS is the market leader. And that presents some unique challenges at times. We also are the home of the state newspaper. That's a regional daily newspaper. Once upon a time, it was distributed to homes and had a newsstand presence across the state. That has changed in recent years, as you might expect, with your own local newspapers having reduced their distribution area. But nonetheless, the state is a major paper of record in the state of South Carolina. There are also multiple weekly newspapers that are embedded very strongly and firmly in the local municipalities throughout Lexington County, again, right here in the middle of South Carolina. We also have a hyper local blog, a blog that you wouldn't believe it, but it is actually started by a retired firefighter. And he started it as a hobby, but now it has turned into a significant media player on the scene with a very loyal, very dedicated audience. And in fact, among that audience includes the assignment managers and the reporters and producers at the television stations and even the editors at the newspaper, because he gets information first and he gets information very, very quickly. Also presents some challenges to us. In terms of the tools that we have, we, like you, more than likely, we have Facebook and Twitter as our primary distribution models, getting this information directly to the public. We've got about 62,000 and change following us on Facebook and about 13,000 on Twitter. We have grown those audiences significantly over the last 5 years. And I would attribute that growth in an audience to the level of content and the immediacy with which we're sharing information directly with our community. So I feel like our engagement is good, but with the quality of content going up, we've also, of course, as you would expect, we've seen those audience numbers go up. So let's go back to July of 2016. It was at that point, I had been with the agency for about a year, and we made a decision to overhaul a position that had been more web intensive. It had been almost an IT type position that we repurposed into what we now call the digital communications coordinator, a very fancy term, essentially for someone who is responsible for all things social media, all things digital content, video, and also all branding for the agency. We hired someone from the local CBS affiliate here in the Columbia, South Carolina market in July of 2016. It was at that point we had no equipment except a rickety old tripod that we still have and use in a pinch. But we essentially just had our iPhones, and that was it. What we did also have, though, is we had the license from the sheriff, and we had the vision to cover the agency like a beat. In essence, to report on our information, our cases, our personnel, our investigations, and essentially break our own news. So that was the vision we had, and we were on a mission to complete that. And we also felt like with this television reporter coming immediately from a newsroom here locally, she knew the players, and we wanted her to step in and essentially cover the agency like a beat and report on all of the goings on, be those critical incidents or like feature stories for the agency. We started that again in July of 2016, and within weeks of this individual becoming employed and onboarding here at the agency, we had an opportunity to cover the agency, and it presented us with a situation where we could essentially cover the reporters who were covering us. This was, pardon me, this was in the wake of some civil unrest in the Charlotte area after an officer-involved shooting with the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department there in Charlotte, North Carolina. And we had an opportunity to bring in 4 television reporters and our hyper-local blogger, the former firefighter, and put them through some use of force drills and scenarios. We did laser shot with them. We also put them through some practical exercises, all of them based on actual scenarios that our deputies had faced in the preceding months. Our opportunity here presented us with an opportunity to put this mindset into practice. So it was at that point, the day of this event, no less, when we looked at each other, this new employee and myself, and said, we probably need a video account of what happens here today in case some of the stories perhaps cast us in a different light. We want to make sure that we document this. So in essence, we covered the reporters covering us. And the result was the video I want to share with you now.
I don't know if we're supposed to have sound, but we don't. Adam, are you aware that we have no sound?
No, I'm sorry.
Just go ahead and start it again.
Well, I'm hearing you guys aren't getting audio on that, and I have audio on my side, so I apologize for that technical issue. Let me recap though quickly that video. That video, again, documented the training exercises, the day-long training exercises that we put those members of the media through, and we put them on camera. Well, this video posted at about 7, and within 2 hours, it had 750,000 views on Facebook. It eclipsed 1 million by about 8 or 9 o'clock. The next day we woke up, it had 3 million views. So far more people obviously saw our video than all of the other television stations' reports combined. And now almost 13 million views later, it's still out there. It gets probably at least a comment or two a day. And anytime something like that happens, it does get more comments. So at that point, we realized we had a situation where we were very, very on the edge of something that was something that was very different, that we were covering the agency and that we were covering and producing our own content in a way that really hadn't been done here, at least not to this level. So we had the television expertise, and all of that was shot on our phones, by the way, which was a challenge. So and also we had no software to edit on also. So it's amazing how even with that, it had such great success. Here's an interesting side note, though. We strategically selected all of the reporters to pitch the story to and invite them to take a part in it, but we didn't think about their contract status. So we did that in September, and by February, all 4 of those television reporters who were part of that were all gone. So just something to think about if you do a similar type exercise. You may find that if you don't know who might be sticking around or who's been there a while, important though to be strategic about selecting that. Now, throughout today, I am probably going to say some things that might step on some toes a little bit, or perhaps might rattle a cage or two. And one of those terms that gets me rattled from time to time is the term media partners. And if you use this term, or if it's a part of your agency's culture, or if it's a part of the relationship that you have with your media outlets, that's fine. I certainly do not have an issue. You know your media outlets, and you know your community, you know your culture better than, certainly better than I do, and better than anybody else. However, for this situation where we're producing our agency's own news, where we are breaking our own stories and sharing information directly with our community, I think it's important for us to think of our media outlets that we work with not just as partners, and that's okay, because that's certainly a part of what they are. But we also have to think of them as competitors to some degree. Let me share with you what I mean. I want our community to hear information from us about a critical incident, or about something happening in their neighborhood, about a series of robberies happening in their local business community area. I want them to hear that from us first. So I want to break our own news. When I use that phrase, that's exactly what I mean. I don't want to serve that information up, if I can help it, to go to a media outlet first. I think there are a lot of reasons that this is very advantageous for us in the law enforcement communications profession to think about. We'll recap some of those later. But in terms of being media partners, I think it serves us well to think of them as competitors. Please, though, do not hear what I'm not saying. I'm not saying have an adversarial relationship with your media. I'm not saying pick and choose and treat one unfairly or give one better treatment, partial treatment. I'm certainly not saying that at all. I am saying, though, think of them as a competitor, and that makes us all better and makes us all sharper. It's important to remember that your audience is not the reporter. It's not the media outlets. It's the reporters, viewers, and readers. So a lot of times when we get in a media-centric mindset as communications professionals and as public information officers, it's very easy to become overly focused, maybe even too focused on that media relationship and on the reporter during that interview or during that time when we're gathering information or on a scene. However, we have got to remember that media outlets and reporters are conduits, excuse me, and their audience is our audience, because their audience is our community, and that's who we want to reach. I want to go back to the incident that we started to talk about when I mentioned that the sheriff did his media briefing and then faced no questions after that media briefing. It was an officer-involved shooting, February 2017. We had a situation where we were out with the U.S. Marshals Task Force. A shooting and an exchange of gunfire took place between a wanted subject and officers, including ours and other members of this U.S. Marshals Task Force. Once we arrived on scene, as I referenced, we began tweeting out throughout that afternoon before the sheriff went live in front of the cameras, because we wanted to get that information directly to neighbors who were around where the location, where the incident happened at that location, which was in a residential area. So we live tweeted, if you will, the 4 Ps. So as you go forward and think about how to tweet during the immediate aftermath of a critical incident, I always like to remember the 4 Ps: process, policy, procedure, and protocol. Now, is there some overlap to those? Absolutely. Are there certainly some carryover from one P to the other, perhaps? Very much so. But if you think about those four, it will help you determine some messaging that can be very effective and that can also be extremely efficient as you make efforts to try to reach your community. And not only, of course, are you reaching the community, but you're sharing information with, of course, the media on scene or those media representatives who will shortly be coming to the scene. The four Ps were very critical to us in this situation because we didn't have a lot of details. This strategy also is very important in those situations when you're not able to share specifics. Either you don't have them, or due to the nature of the investigation, you simply cannot share them to protect the integrity of that investigation. Talk process. When short on details, talk process. Talk the four Ps, including also policy, procedure, and protocol. We also, in the wake of this, like you, I'm sure, we tweeted out such specific information in terms of a media staging area that the media came there and they stayed there, which was very helpful to us as the scene was very hectic initially. And they knew that if they were going to get information, they'd be getting it from Twitter or they'd be getting it from us there at the media staging area. So one of the other themes that we took away from this situation where, again, the sheriff left out there on the 6 o'clock news with no questions asked from the media is that we kept them very well informed through Twitter, and we also were able to put them in a location, if you will, and not restrict them, of course, but assign them or make them aware of this location where we would be doing all of the communications. I need to pause right now very quickly and share with you that we have had an average of about 3 or 4 officer-involved shootings a year for the last 5 years. So we have had a lot of these. So a lot of these precepts and a lot of these strategies have been very effective, not only in some of the incidents that I'm recapping for you here today, but in others as well. We have, again, had about 3 or 4 a year. Something else that I want to share with you is that all of our operational radio traffic is encrypted. Does that help us execute the strategy and pull off some of what we're able to do? I think it does a little bit, but I do want to share with you that fire and EMS, they roll to virtually every critical incident, that certainly all of the ones that I'm going to cover today and all of the ones we have, and they are not encrypted. So the newsrooms, while they're not listening to our day-to-day back and forth radio traffic, because again, it is encrypted, they are listening to fire and EMS, which is rolling on every type situation that we're covering here today. So as I mentioned, we have about 3 to 4, unfortunately, over the past 5 years, have had averaged about 3 or 4 officer-involved shootings over the course of any of those given years. So the first one that I recapped, February of 2017. So in May of 2017, we were able to get the ultimate scoop after yet another officer-involved shooting. A suspect was fatally wounded in a remote area of Lexington County. And the reason this was the ultimate scoop is because no member of the media found out about it until we shared the video that you see pictured in the tweet of the sheriff recapping and providing the details that he could provide. And what was amazing from this is after that video was tweeted, that was the sheriff presenting the information again that he could share, we received no follow-up calls. And that is because I believe that we provided the information, and at this point, members of our community and also our local media outlets knew, based on this being the second event that we had treated in the same fashion, they knew that we had shared everything that we could share, and in good faith, they trusted us on that. And of course, we held true to that in good faith. But the no follow-ups is something that I think is very important because we have a lot of situations where in PIO world, the follow-ups can begin to overwhelm us. And in these situations, we didn't have that. And you may say, well, you don't work where I work. I work in a larger market. I have more reporters. You don't know the reporters I have. I'm going to share this with you just to illustrate, oh no, we get follow-ups and we do get plenty of proactive calls. Mere days, within days of the incident I just recapped for you as the ultimate scoop, we had a stray pig escape from our animal pen. Yes, we track down livestock here sometimes in Lexington County as a part of a service to our community. And we had a pig that we had captured, a runaway pig, escape from our stray animal pen, which is behind our detention center. And the video that you see in the tweet on the presentation was taken by a resident who thought it was unusual, and certainly it is, to see a pig walking down through a subdivision. So we received more calls and more follow-ups on this pig and our capturing of the pig, our placing the pig up for adoption and transporting it to its new home than we did for an officer-involved shooting, again, within the same week, which still to this day strikes me as rather incredible. So we do get our fair share of follow-ups. I like to throw that in there. 2017 was a busy year for us. Another officer-involved shooting, September 2017, limited media response. It was pouring down rain. It was September 11th, 2017. So there were a lot of news crews who were covering various September 11th remembrance events. And we were able to, again, share information directly from the sheriff to the community and also available for media use, of course. And we received limited follow-up calls in response to this. So by now, at this point, after 3 critical incidents, all of them officer-involved shootings, the situation had been established, and really that same pattern, of course. March 2018, we had a standoff on Interstate 26. If you're not familiar with this part of the country, Interstate 26 is a somewhat major interstate. It runs essentially between Charleston, South Carolina, and Asheville, North Carolina. After a very extended pursuit that had crossed 2 counties back and forth a couple of times, a suspect stopped on Interstate 26 and threatened to take his life. This, of course, led to more robust coverage because a major interstate was shut down for multiple hours. It impacted a lot of people. However, this same mindset of being the authoritative source for information and sharing this information and essentially covering the incident with a journalistic feel, if you will, was a part of how we approached this in March of 2018. And again, the situation unfolded, and while it didn't have certainly the outcome that we hoped for, because the individual ended up presenting and pointing a weapon toward SWAT team members as they approached his vehicle after some 3 hours or 4 hours or so, as I recall, it still nonetheless provided us an opportunity to implement this model, once again use these same strategies. And as a result, our community was informed, and also our local media was very much engaged, and they felt very well served by the information and the images we served up. The image you see there was the image of the event, if you will, as most of the initial reporting included images that were taken by personnel, obviously within the line and very close to the incident itself. 2020, of course, has changed things considerably in terms of operations in the law enforcement world, and also how we share this information, how we engage our communities as public information professionals. So I want to fast forward to this year. And in August of 2020, we had an incredible run of a few weeks. You'll hear about the second incident here in a few moments. But in August of 2020, an individual in the middle of an apartment complex, in response to a domestic incident, deputies had arrived, and he brings his child outside the apartment after they had arrived on scene, and he begins to use his child as a human shield in an attempt to engage the deputies. The man was armed. He pulls a weapon from his waistband, fires a handgun toward the deputies. 2 of them were hit, one of them twice, one of them a single gunshot wound. Both of those deputies are okay. The suspect was also shot. However, he lived, and he is set to stand trial for that. He was already out on bond for a previous crime in another county. However, this presented a different situation, of course. It was at the point of 2020, after where things had changed considerably, and there was certainly a heightened sensitivity. But because even with the dozens of residents outside in the parking lot of an apartment complex, all of them, of course, had their phones, filming everything, sharing everything on social, some of them directly sharing information with reporters as they began to trickle on the scene, we still nonetheless stuck with the 4 Ps that I mentioned earlier. And we began with that information. We broke the story initially. We didn't wait for reporters to come on scene, which was quite candidly sometime later. However, we broke this story ourselves. As a result of the steady stream of information, and also as a result, again, of the understanding among the newsrooms and our community members, they knew we were sharing everything that we possibly could. The follow-ups related to this incident basically were tied all to calls about the deputy conditions. Just a couple of short weeks later, in September of this year, deputies responded to another domestic call. This led to a subject barricading himself inside the home. He opened fire from his home on deputies, striking one deputy in the head with some fire. Of course, dozens of residents were on scene. This was inside of a new subdivision. And again, those 4 Ps were critical as we shared this information. However, this is where I can emphasize to you, we didn't wait until media to arrive. I consider that to be the old way of doing business. We wanted to immediately share with residents what they needed to do. And because this standoff with the barricaded subject ended up lasting, the initial incident, the initial fire from the suspect on the deputies, happened at about 4:30 in the afternoon, and he didn't come out of his home until about 3 o'clock the next morning. So because of all of the large presence, because of all of the uncertainty that could have happened, we needed to get information directly to those residents inside that subdivision, tell them what to do, tell them what was going on, and that's what we did. And again, our media very engaged on that. Subsequently, the calls were all about the deputy's condition, and we really didn't get a lot of calls about particulars. We couldn't share those anyway because they're still under criminal investigation, but nonetheless, I think it's important to note those calls were all related to the health conditions. I want to rewind back to 2017 because in Lexington County, the name you see before you, to be perfectly candid with you, is a bit of an unusual name. We are a county that does not have a lot of Muslim individuals residing within the county, so a name like this that is tied to the Muslim faith is unusual to see. This individual was arrested on a disorderly conduct charge. They had drugs on their person, and the individual ingested the drugs on the way to the detention center, collapsed inside the detention center on November 1st, transported to the hospital, died November 8th with drugs as a result of ingesting them on the way inside the unit, drugs in their blood and the urine of that individual at the autopsy. And this might be one of the situations, and I share this with you because, as you'll note, November 1st to November 8th, a little bit longer than we like to go, roughly a week there, of course. However, we did not get any media calls on this until we broke the news ourselves. So it's one of those that I look back on and say, I really wish we had issued a news release later. That's how we broke this news, by issuing a news release. Maybe the most intense news release I've ever had to write in my years in this profession, one of the ones that I attacked with the most care and the most consideration, and certainly I believe the most deliberation of any that I've ever done, just because this was certainly a very sensitive, could have been even more sensitive situation. However, once we shipped the news release, much to my disbelief, we did not receive any follow-ups, and essentially the news release was cut and pasted onto local media outlets, and we moved on from the story. I believe that when you can tell your story, then you can tell stories nobody else can tell. Let me explain what I mean by that. When you're sharing your story in this type of a mindset, it is important for you to know that you're going to be presented with opportunities where, yes, could you ignore the critical incidents? Could you ignore the so-called bad stories? Absolutely, you could, but it's important to tell all stories. So when you can tell those, you can tell stories that are not going to be told. In this situation, again, don't have the audio with the technical problems, but this was related to some shots that were being fired at homes on a dirt road in a remote part of our county. And quite frankly, the media it just wasn't getting a lot of traction among media outlets. So we were able to share this story with a very professional, very efficient sounding voiceover with the video down from the scene. It has a really nice news feel, and we were able to get information on a suspect and make sure that they were arrested, and eventually they were sentenced to a prison term because of what they were shooting at and because of the acts that they had committed. This is another story, and quite frankly, we always hear about no good stories are in the news anymore. You never tell the nice stories. You never tell the fun stories. And that's because, quite frankly, media budgets have shrunk. Newsroom staffing levels are lower than they've ever been. And quite frankly, there just isn't the time to tell them. But with the ability to tell your own story, the ability to break your own news, not only does that help you in those critical incidents, but it helps you tell those feel-good stories that maybe other media outlets, traditional media outlets, are not going to have the time or the resources or the staffing to tell anymore. And this is one of those, again, I wish we could play this, but with the audio, I'll recap it for you briefly. This is an autistic student. He graduated a couple of years ago. That's who you're seeing there on the screen. His mother attributes his success throughout his entire school career to 2 school resource officers. So we were able to tell the story of the relationship between these 2 SROs and this young man and his graduation from high school in a way that nobody was able to tell. And that is what is a great success, because not only are we telling those stressful, critical incident type stories, but we appreciate the opportunity to be able to tell those feel-good stories. So you may be asking yourself, well, look, this is great. I don't have a lot of stuff. I don't have a budget. I don't have the staffing level. All it takes is for you to put on a reporter hat. Grab a reporter hat and start thinking like a reporter. Think about, what are you seeing on the news? What are you reading on your phone? What is on those newscasts? And if you've worked with your agency, worked at your agency, and worked with the media for any length of time, you know that feel, and you know what's going to make news and how things are going to be received in your community, because again, you know your community and your agency like nobody else. But think about, with that reporter hat on, what am I going to want to know? What am I going to want to see in terms of video, in terms of images? And who am I going to want to talk to? Let me share this with you. There's always going to be that request for thank you for the PIO, or thank you for the chief, thank you for this detective. But who is this affecting? Who has been helped by this? Who is the real person we can talk to? Think about that as you put your reporter hat on. Some of the items, some of the equipment that you want, we all have a smartphone. You can shoot video on a smartphone. We're all, of course, used to seeing video on a smartphone. We're used to seeing it. Maybe it's not on a tripod. Maybe it's a little shaky. Maybe it's not focused. Maybe it's not beautifully lit like a Steven Spielberg production out of Hollywood. However, we as an audience in 2020 certainly are conditioned to do that. You can also use iMovie and other things to do some editing. I'll talk about a really cool editing app for you here in a moment. You can also step up your game a little bit and shoot with a DSLR. This is an example of one we have. This requires certainly more of an investment. If you have budget concerns, then you're going to have to make sure that you think about those when you consider the purchase of a camera like this. However, for video shooting and, of course, still photography, this type of a camera can work very, very well. I want to show these 2 gadgets to you because they are very important to getting good audio. The iRig that you see, left-hand side of the screen, plugs right into a camera or a smartphone, and it turns a microphone into something, again, that could be used right there with a basic consumer level recording device. It's good to have one of these on hand. I believe these are very affordable for most of you. You can pick them up, of course, on Amazon or other places online, but if you want to put your hand on one and really look at the packaging, Guitar Center has one. Guitar Center also sells the item on the right. It's a Smart Lav Plus made by Rode, and this microphone clips on and it makes for great sound. You can shoot very quick interviews or very quick scene setting type videos at a critical incident or a fun fundraiser type community event that you're doing with your agency. But it's the SmartLav Plus, and again, plugs right into your smartphone where the headphone jack goes, and you can still, of course, use it in your iPhone. You got to get that lightning to mini plug adapter that you might have already. But this plugs directly into a smartphone, and it's a great tool to use. Let me share with you this too. Videolicious, yes, it sounds like a site or an app that may have some questionable, not suitable for work content. However, I assure you it is all suitable for work. Videolicious is a video editing app. And while iMovie is great when you have time, when you're out in the field on a critical incident or when you're trying to do something very, very quickly, Videolicious is a great free app that you can use. It makes video editing happen really and truly at the touch of a screen. You can line up the pictures you want, you can line up the video you want, and it's as simple as hitting those when you want them. You can record yourself. Videolicious is a great app for you to use. I do encourage you to take a look at it. It is available in a free version, and there's also a paid version too, of course. I've never found a need to use the paid version. I think the free version will work out for you. Now, when we think about your agency and your news, generating your own content and breaking your own news and not being reactive, however, being proactive, I got news. Everybody is not going to love you. It, quite frankly, is going to be a challenge. Now, if you're not doing this and if you've not thought about this, I want to share a few groups who are just simply not going to love you. Our old friends in the newspaper business, and by old, I mean those folks who've been around for a long time, they very freely refer to themselves as ink-stained wretches. They're not going to be, they can give you some kickback a little bit on this mindset. And just a quick aside, my local newspaper here, one of the reporters shared with me one time, we had this story, you guys put it out, we had it first, you should have let us do it, and then you should have come behind us and do it. And I just said, look, my job is not to dispense, it's not to dispense stories, not in that way. It's not to give you leads or give you extra jumps on anything. It's to inform our community. And so you may receive a little bit of, again, just a little kickback on that. Our friends in the school district world, they also are not really excited about going out with information unless they get a call. If there's something that's happened in a school, but obviously with our SROs in the schools, there are times where we do have to go out and go ahead and share information proactively and make sure that we get that information out first, because I believe that is something that is beneficial to all of those parents in those schools. But I love and have a great relationship with our school district PIOs. We work well together, but there are some times where we have to say, we have to go out with this. We can't wait on you guys to do it, to parents or whatever, but we coordinate. That's what I will tell you is important, to coordinate with that. Private sector PR pros also can present a challenge for you as well. But again, if they're in your local corporate community, you'll know them, you'll work with them, and hopefully coordinate the release of information. I do encourage you, though, to remember your audience, because you're going to know your community. You're going to know that audience that's with you on Facebook, what they like. I encourage you, if you don't routinely do it, take a look at the insights that are available on the different social media platforms and look and see the types of numbers that different types of content is getting on your social media platforms. For us, they enjoy what we serve up on the hard news front. They're not as engaged on the softer, feel-good stories. They like hard news. But take a look and see what your audience does and how they vote, if you will, for your content, because that will tell you exactly what to serve up and what to focus on. I believe this approach is important. I believe it will serve you well, and I believe it's valuable because it accelerates the speed of info. It gets the information out to the community sooner rather than later. It is something that In this day and age, in the information age in which we live, they're expecting information. And I think also it's great because it positions us as the authoritative source of information. We, again, have the information about our personnel, about our cases, about the investigations, what happened. We should be at the forefront of that. I encourage you to think about that as you, again, get ready to strategize and put your plans together. I believe this approach in terms of covering your agency like a beat, breaking your own news, strengthens community trust. Because in sharing information that not only is for the feel-good, light-hearted stuff, but sharing things when they don't go well, sharing things when it's not very popular or it could lead to some serious concerns down the road, that nonetheless, in the long run, will strengthen community trust. It will build a bond between your community, your audience, and your agency. And finally, quite candidly, I believe this approach increases operational efficiency. It's a very fancy way of saying simply, I believe it's oftentimes, almost without fail, it's simply faster and more efficient to do it this way. I think we can go to a scene and we can wait on media to show up. We can work with them there, and that may take a considerable amount of time. Or we can go ahead and break that information. We can share that news immediately. We can get the word out to our community. And yeah, the media is going to come right after that. You're going to have reporters flowing your way when you begin saying, at the corner of Jones and Mitchell Street, this is happening. But that situation is still going to prove in the long run to be more efficient for your public information efforts, your public information program. And again, it's going to do those other two things. The information is out faster and the community strength is strengthened. Well, this time I'll be happy to, for real now, take any questions that you might have. I'd love to hear thoughts about what you've experienced in your town and in your market with your agency. And let me close before we do go to the question and comment time with Lori. Let me close by emphasizing, once again, we have a great relationship with our media outlets. I do not in any way advocate an adversarial approach to them. And certainly I don't want anyone to think that I'm saying, let's cut them out, let's leave them out of the mix, because they're a conduit. I want to reach their audience as well, because that's our community. But at the same time, I think this approach does those three things we just discussed. I think it positions us in the profession to be trusted and also to be, again, that top credible source of information that brings all of the facts authoritatively, candidly, and also in a very transparent way.
Outstanding. Thank you, Adam. This would be a really good time to load your questions into the Q&A section, or just go ahead and raise your hands if you have comments. We have some fairly seasoned PIOs on the call. You may just have a comment or something to point out as well. And we're really happy to make this a conversation. You know, Adam, earlier in the week, we had a presenter who said something I thought was quite eloquent. He said, you need to have PIOs who are trusted. PIOs you can trust and PIOs who know they're trusted. And it sounds to me like you've got that kind of people above your level who place complete trust in you.
I do. I'm very fortunate in that. I report directly to the sheriff, so that helps internally, of course, but it also helps externally. And that is something that I know not everybody has, and it's something that is sometimes easy to say, well, you really need to report or at least have a seat at the table with the boss. And it's very easy to say that. And when you don't, how do you go somewhere and say that? But that is something that I'm very fortunate to have. And I think it helps in a situation like this because with a mindset, an operational mindset like this, because that trust is there, and you understand that you have the liberty and the license to again, go out and, like I've mentioned before, essentially cover a critical incident and report on it directly to the public.
Awesome. We did have a question that came in. You say you don't wait for media to arrive necessarily to brief people, the people who live there. Do you handle that in terms of format, like just a press conference?
Um, yeah, at times we do, and if it's informal. If there have been times where we have had a number of community members gather around us, they can see that there's obviously a presence in their area and they're wanting to find out what's going on. There have been times where we've gathered them around and essentially had a de facto, briefing with them. And that goes a long way. And of course, we also then share with them at the conclusion of that session, that time together, we say, you can follow us at LCSD_news. You can follow us on Facebook. All of the information will be there. And they go away engaged, and they then understand that we're there to share the information directly with them. They understand also that, okay, this is why they're there, and they're going to be very frank and very candid with us and very transparent with us, again, to use that word. And it has paid dividends for us. And then we know, again, the media is on its way, and we'll do the same thing with them. And I don't know if any others, any of you try to keep residents away from a media briefing. If you do one on a scene somewhere, we probably not, but I've seen it done. And we always just let people come up and listen as well. We are like, hey, we're talking to the public. You're our ultimate audience. So stay right there and listen in, and certainly don't have any type of problem with anybody joining in on that.
And we have a comment from Lynn. We had the same experience as you did when we put out a very detailed press release and got 0 follow-up calls. It was definitely a game changer for the way we report our news. Great presentation. So that looks like all the questions we have. I just want to say thank you again. There certainly is a common theme this week of, getting the information out sooner rather than later is sort of the way we're moving. Some of us, people like me, have been watching law enforcement for years, are like, let's all right already, let's do this. And it's so refreshing to see professionals like you just get it right day in and day out. So thank you, and that's why we invited you to talk with the audience today. Thank you, Captain.
Thank you.
All right, we'll see you again.